Coming up, it is officially tamper time around the NFL. Where will Joe Schoen and the New York Football Giants look to stake their claim, as already some of the musical chairs at various key positions are starting to get filled? We dive in live coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is, of course, OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andy Makowitz. We're both healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, and ready for some tamper time conversation around the NFL, live on Twitter and on YouTube. Feel free to throw up your questions, comments, players that you think the Giants should already have tampered their way to a long-term deal for Big Blue. Andy's going to be watching over on Twitter to see if there's any updates, and it's already starting to come through. A handful of players have already had signings, Andy, but as we have come into it, the good reminder here is, as you hear about the tampering, the rumors, the speculations, and there's some concerning ones, because we'll talk about Russell Wilson, the quarterback stuff, which is interesting and relative to the Giants, but there's some probably bigger ones here when we talk about in-division teams. A reminder, though, that no one individual move here happens in a vacuum, right? If they sign player X, the Giants or otherwise, it's relative to how much you spend there, how it impacts your ability to go get other positions of need. And we probably won't know until we get pretty far into free agency how we feel about what Joe Schoen and the Giants accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you mentioned about nothing in a vacuum. We may see that, some of our homegrown guys like Xavier McKinney or Saquon Barkley sign with a different team for $2, $3, $4 million more. And the initial reaction is, why couldn't we just pay a couple million more? And what you have to realize is you're not building the best individual position room. You're building the best team. And it may preclude you from being able to sign an offensive guard or a tackle or a cornerback or get the players that you want to build out the roster the way that it's gone. And so for me, the initial reports, I think there's an easy place to start for us, Adam, on this specifically Giants related. Hurts a little bit, but we're going to have to figure out how we feel about it. And I'll start with it. So Adam Schefter, right as 12 o'clock hits, says the Bears are expected to have very strong interest in DeAndre Swift, former running back free agent of the Philadelphia Eagles. Off of that, New York Post writer Ryan Dunleavy comes out and says, sounds like Swift knows that there's another running back coming to town, which hints at something that would be soul-crushing for most Giant fans. And Diana Rossini just tweeted about 3 minutes ago, the Eagles and the Texans are expected to have strong interest in signing running back Saquon Barkley per sources. License plate guy, one of the biggest Giant fans on the planet, just put in exclamation points in all capitals, pissed, which is never a good sign because he has some inside information from the player side. Adam, the first thing is we knew that this was going to get a little weird. You had to be okay with Saquon Barkley maybe signing elsewhere. But does it have to be Philadelphia? Does it really have to be Philadelphia where Saquon ends up going?
Listen, we talked about this the other day, honestly, that you can look at it one of two ways. I mean, personal preference, go play in the AFC, right? Go play for the Texans, go with tax-free and make extra money for yourself, and let's take you as far away, competition-wise, from the NFC East and from the New York Football Giants. The other piece is, though, if you believe that moving on from Saquon is the right decision, that ultimately you don't want to spend whatever that dollar amount turns out to be and you want to allocate it elsewhere, then you have to accept the fact that he may end up playing for the Philadelphia Eagles or for the Dallas Cowboys or for an NFC team, right? Yes, there are ideal versions where you don't want it to be in your backyard, but when you play at Penn State and your family's from the area, it shouldn't have been out of the realm of painful possibilities for Giants fans that Saquon Barkley may want to stay somewhat regional. And I'll be honest with you too, for all of the conversations, Joe Schoen, Saquon Barkley representatives saying, I want to be a Giant for life. I want to retire a Giant. We respect him, captain, big vocal guy in the locker room, has done everything the right way. All that stuff is amazing. And also, if you think that Saquon Barkley, after being drafted second overall by the Giants and then playing for a team that has not been able to really compete at a high level for his entire career effectively, is not thinking, that wouldn't hurt if I was still in division and 2 times a year I get to go and play the New York Football Giants and do that both and help my new team win. and also have Giants fans boo their own ownership if they feel like it was the wrong move to let him walk. It stinks, man. I wouldn't prefer it, but it is what it is. He's a free agent. Like that's how it goes.
Listen, when you break up with your significant other, you don't get to dictate who they end up dating after you're like, yeah, I don't want you to date my coworker, but like it doesn't really matter. You've ultimately given up the say in the
Close
discussion.
to NFC's. This feels close to being like, and then you started dating my first cousin. Like that seemed, boy, that stung a little bit. I'm going to see you at holiday parties a couple times a year.
Yeah, can you pass the mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving? It gets a little awkward. Like we used to host this at your family's house. I can see how it gets a little awkward, and maybe it does for Saquon. I understand that all of his family, are Eagle fans, and he grew up in the area. So the pull and the allure of not having to actually uproot his life and move too far, like they're only an hour and change away from where he is now. Like the whole change wouldn't be crazy for him. It just feels like. He said he really wants to be a Giant. He wants to remain here. Depending on what the numbers of what the Giants offered and what he would end up settling for with Philadelphia, that to me would be the really telling point of whether or not he really wanted to be here or if he just wanted the most money. And there's no problem with taking the most money. Right. And so, switching gears very quickly over to another Giants free agent, Xavier McKinney. Diana Rossini came out and said, the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles look like they're the biggest competition to the Giants in signing Xavier McKinney. Ralph Vacchiano came out and said the Eagles, by the way, could end up being the Giants' primary competition for safety Xavier McKinney, but don't rule out the Green Bay Packers. So all the beat writers are all putting the same names out there for both Saquon Barkley as well as Xavier McKinney. Do you have any feelings, not knowing the numbers, hearing the teams? Is there anything that you're thinking about for Xavier McKinney or Saquon?
Well, I mean, Saquon-wise, I wouldn't be surprised because they talk about the number being around 10 million, right? But if you're looking for that value, and I don't know whether or not, see, it's interesting, like rival team in division, Philadelphia Eagles, are you just poking around because you want to say we're offering him 11.5 or 12 million just for the Giants to have to do that dance of, oh, should we match or not? Or should we go to the market? Specifically staying in that room, because you also had mentioned when we were about to go live here about another note, Tony Pollard maybe being a running back on the Giants' radar in order to replace Saquon. Now, so I'll use it as the example. The difference here being, if let's say it's 11.5 million for Saquon Barkley, wherever he's going to go, as it stands right now, at least Spot Track had Tony Pollard at 6.5 million. So, what is the threshold? Is it 3 million? Is it 4 million? What does the gap have to be between what Saquon Barkley gets paid and whatever you end up paying to rebuild that position in free agency and in the draft to say it makes sense? And this is why we said at the top, nothing happens in a vacuum. If you're telling me it could be a $5 million difference, and I personally don't know if Tony Pollard is the right guy to target for the Giants, but Kafka offensive system, have we ever really seen the full maturation of that? But if you tell me that I save $5 million that position and I address it elsewhere, I'm halfway home to adding in another key depth piece to this roster. When you look at Xavier McKinney and say, maybe we save $4 million at that position based on who we go and sign.
Yeah, that's the tough part is what is the disparity between the second tier running backs and the top tier running backs? You consider Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley kind of in the top tier. Then you have the Tony Pollards of the world, even DeAndre Swift and others are in there. To your point, Adam, if you can get Tony Pollard for half the amount that Saquon is, let's just say it's 12 million and 6 million.
Right.
Would you say that you could get half the production from Tony Pollard that you could get from Saquon Barkley and spend the money elsewhere? My argument would be, I think you would get more value out of Tony Pollard than half of what Saquon could. And then you could think about, how could we utilize a running back by committee? Maybe we sign a third or fourth round running back. All of a sudden, we're not putting as much wear and tear on the player. If you sign Saquon Barkley for 12 million, you intend on giving him as many carries as you can to help lead your team. So there is nuance to the discussion. It's like, if it's the difference between 8.5 million and 10.5 million between the two, you probably would lean towards let's keep Saquon Barkley. But remember, that 2.5 million might be the difference between keeping Xavier McKinney or not keeping Xavier McKinney. As we said at the top of the show, none of these decisions happen in a vacuum, and that's the toughest part about it.
So the other thing is here, I want to get to the quarterback conversation. Obviously, Russ Wilson, he's going to be heading to Pittsburgh. There's some other dominoes that fell here too, and I think are interesting. We talk about the top of the draft, but before we do that, as you say, spending money. Let's see what else you have to update here before we turn over to the offensive line for a minute.
Quick update. Mike Garofalo just came out. The Bears have agreed to terms with DeAndre Swift on a 3-year, $24 million deal. So after a career year with the Eagles, a 3-year, $24 million deal, about $8 million per year. Don't have the guarantees yet. Obviously, these initial announcements are from the agent who wants to show that they're getting top line money for their player. They don't say that he only got $11 million in guaranteed money, but right out of the gate, that's an interesting number to see. It happened very quickly. The Eagles clearly didn't want to match at that number. Are they willing to go to 11 million or 12 million to be able to get Saquon Barkley?
Well, and that's the difference too. So I'm looking over on Spot Track real quick here because I wanted to see if they'll give me, if I can pull up the market value for Swift coming into this free agent period and try to give, what's the relative based on what he was supposed to be versus where it stands right now. Tricky part is a website like Spot Track is going to be absolutely crushed right now with traffic as everyone's looking over at it and they're trying to update it. So we'll see where that lands. To your point, and just like we talked about with Pollard relative to Barkley for the Giants, whether it's the Eagles right now and they're trying to make a decision about wanting to keep Swift around, so it was 6.7 million was the market value for Swift, at least by Spot Track. So just to keep it relative, right? 6.5 for Pollard, 6.7 for Swift, and Saquon Barkley was listed just a hair under 10 at 9.9. So if these numbers are moving up, can we maybe suggest that Saquon Barkley is going to be closer to 12 than to 10? That'd be the relative thing to see what happens here.
Well, so Adam, what's interesting is Adam Schefter just tweeted out that the 3-year, $24.5 million deal includes $15.3 million in guaranteed money. So they're not even guaranteeing all of the first 2 years, which I find interesting and is kind of in line with what we've heard the Giants offered Saquon Barkley in his multi-year deals, where maybe it was 3 years, $33 million with about 20, 21, 22 guaranteed. That feels to be ratio-wise in line with what others are signing in the market for right now.
So then, if that's the percentages, then I'll tell you right now, whether it's Philadelphia or it's the Houston Texans, I think if you're the Giants, concerned isn't the word. If you want to be in on it, you can be. But I would understand being prepared for apprehension around the Texans just saying, we have more cap space to work with. We can throw a couple extra dollars. You're going to make a little extra money on your contract because of the tax incentives there in Dallas relative to what you'd be paying in New York. So how are those numbers going to flesh out? You could end up sitting here saying the Giants might have been $1.5 million below what maybe the open market would want to pay Saquon Barkley. Let's just call it 11.5 from the Houston Texans. The Giants want to pay 10. Okay, but now it's more like 2.5 million, $3 million difference because of the tax implications. All of a sudden, that gap gets wider and wider. And what I found really fascinating too, coming into this, is a player like Jacobs, who's a year younger than Saquon Barkley, but they're right there. But when you went and looked at projections, it was, well, that's a 3-year deal if you're Saquon Barkley. It can be a 4-year deal if you're Josh Jacobs. The age factor mattering there, and maybe guaranteed dollars and the length of the contract, even if the last one is kind of a false year. Houston could also go to that extent with Saquon as well. Maybe that's relative as far as what the Eagles could do, but there's all of these mechanisms here that I just need to see unfold. So Swift is interesting. $8 million average AAV is interesting. $15 million guaranteed. Now give me the second guy though. Like, give me a Josh Jacobs. I need something that takes me up the chain of command here.
A few people on Twitter and X that follow the Bears pretty closely or said, I think, it sounds like it'll be around 8 million per year, 15 million or so guaranteed. And the response and the likes and the retweets from that specific group was, can't say I love focusing resources there at all, to be honest. So like,
for
it
Chicago
seems like a good deal for the Bears on its face value, but people are like, we have other areas that we need to address. Why are we spending $8 million a year in free agency on a running back? And that's even with them potentially resetting the clock with Caleb Williams and trading Justin Fields. So it's surprising to me that usually the playmakers, the people that you see make the big catches or have the big runs and score the big touchdowns, are the ones that fans have the knee-jerk reaction of like, we got to sign this guy. I think people are taking a step back and saying, do we really want to allocate all of this money to the running back position when we know and we're hearing how much the guard position's making in other areas that the Giants clearly need help, right?
Well, that's the big part of it too here. And by the way, so as you said, just to reiterate, $24.5 million for Swift, $15.3 million guaranteed. And just to, as we welcome in one of our first ones here, DJ, you got that backwards. He's leaving Philadelphia. He's going to Chicago. So Swift will not be a part of Philadelphia's plans and still leaves it open for them then to pursue potentially Saquon Barkley. And one more relative thing here too. The Eagles underachieved last year, based on expectations. They really floundered down the stretch of the season, went into the playoffs, and everyone kind of felt like, I don't love our prospects here. So they are a team that is kind of looking to, hey, how do we tweak? How do we revamp and get ourselves right back into that mix for a deep playoff run? That matters. It's kind of one of the things we always talked about with Saquon Barkley when it came to the Giants. It's not even about his talent. It's about where this franchise is and where's this franchise been, right? Typically on the outside looking in, one playoff appearance a couple of years ago, but by and large, putting big money into a running back position we have so many needs is a lot trickier. You mentioned there offensive line. Let's get into this here and set the table because we'll backtrack to QB at some point. It's kind of a subplot, really more towards the draft than free agency. Offensive line, once upon a time, Andy, listen, we said this a month ago. Andy brought up Robert Hunt. We said, let's go. There's a couple other top prospects on the offensive line in free agency. But then Lane Johnson, he went and restructured himself a little bit and all of a sudden maybe tweaked this offensive line market into that wide receiver type stratosphere we saw a couple of years ago with Tyreek Hill getting 30 mil.
Well, you got to actually take it a few days back when the Rams signed Kevin Dotson to a 3-year, $48 million deal, $16 million average annual contract value. All of a sudden, everyone said, whoa, the guard market has moved up considerably. You're going to have to pay up in order to get the guard that you want in free agency. And then you have the Lane Johnson contract restructure, makes him the highest paid guard in league history. He's making $21 million annual contract, average annual contract value. So you had Dotson that set it at 16. You have Lane Johnson that has kind of hurdled over that really quickly at 21 million. Yeah. And now, the Giants were in the Robert Hunt sweepstakes, still may be. They may be in the Michael Onwenu sweepstakes as well. But now many people are saying that it's going to cost over $20 million annually to be able to sign them. Adam, 3 weeks ago, when we were talking about what free agents we wanted, we thought that Robert Hunt could be had for $13 million, that the guard market was going to kind of cap out at 15. Here we are at 21. What's your initial reaction? Is there a breaking point to you when you're like, this is too much money or this is a bridge too far for us to cross?
Well, I mean, there can't be at certain positions because if that's your policy, then guess what? You're probably not signing anybody in free agency, right? Whether it's wide receiver, you don't think they should spend that much. We'll talk about T. Higgins' situation here as well. Whether it's the running back spot, whether it's a safety spot, right? And different positions have different value. But if you're the New York Football Giants, guess what? Maybe this is the price that you pay. You did not correctly fix your offensive line over the last 2 seasons in the regime of Joe Schoen. Evan Neal is right on the cusp of being a bust. You need to bring in competition there. You need to bring in security there. You have the draft to work with as well. But this is the tandem piece. Okay, let's say it's 21 million, right? Match it dollar for dollar. Robert Hunt, Lane Johnson wants the exact same deal. If it's 21 million AAV for Robert Hunt and the Giants go, that's too rich for us. We're going to spend what? Half that money on a guy that we think is serviceable, maybe like a Glowinski. That worked out really well, right? Or we're going to say we'll go to the draft and address this. So while you may save money in free agency now, when you go to the draft, now you're saying, well, is our 6th overall pick going to go to offensive line? If we don't get guard or tackle, are we going to then say one of our 2 second-round picks is going to go towards offensive line as well? What did we miss out on then? Wide receiver, linebacker, edge rusher, right? Other help at other positions. So there is a domino effect here. And I think the other big thing to remember is the cap went up by 20 million. The NFL cap always goes up outside of the COVID year, every single year. And that's why they made up for it this offseason as well, being 10 million over the original projection. It'll go up again next year. So the money does become relative to where the cap sits. And when your percentages of allocation to a given position go from 15% to 12%, that matters. So I think you do have to couch it that way. It is then also objectively nuts that we're seeing the offensive line market potentially double nearly what their free agent market value is. Sometimes you hit the market at the right time. And it looks like for some of these guys, Robert Hunt especially, this is going to be a cash-in moment for them.
Yeah, and there was discussions about Robert Hunt mid-year. Why couldn't they get a deal done? Why couldn't he just sign with the team? And did his agent read the tea
Decision was
leaves
like,
right, because if he was going to
easy,
sign
big
for like
fella,
12 million,
easy.
now all of a sudden he may get 20, 21 million on the open market. Like incredible negotiations and discussions. I want to
Yeah,
pivot.
and just real quick here for Big Joe, like understanding offensive line though, in totality, already from when we started this discussion, going back to very early in the offseason, we did it at top 50 players that were going to be on the market. When we talked about all these positions, at one point, Robert Hunt was closer to 10 million than to 13. I think it was even under, it was like approaching 10 million. And Andy and I kind of said, well, even if you had to pay up to 12 or 13 million, you'd certainly go that distance here. Wherever the number lands, it's going to be 70, 80% over what original market value was. And that's the point here. It's just, and that's okay. That can be fine, but you're still going to have to make those decisions and certainly occupy a bigger percentage of your cap.
Well, Michael Onwenu wants to be paid tackle money. He says he can play tackle, but he projects as an offensive guard. That's where he's played. Of course, he wants tackle money because that's the more money that you get. It's like I
Tight
don't
ends, pay me like
an
a wide receiver.
linebacker.
I can catch every ball you throw my way. Yeah, it turns out everybody's the premium position. I heard Saquon Barkley actually hit the market. He said, I can play left tackle. Just to be clear,
Yes.
if we're putting it out there.
And quarterback too. Just see if he can double dip on both. So Adam, the one thing I do want to pivot to is while we wait for some more news to break, there was breaking news in the wide receiver room over the last hour or so, which I think informs a lot of what the Giants are thinking about doing. So two things. One is Michael Pittman, who was franchise tagged by the Colts, agreed to a multi-year deal with the Colts an hour before free agency. Just under about $24 million is the annual contract value for Michael Pittman. You then have things come out with Bengals franchise wide receiver T. Higgins has requested a trade. He loves Cincinnati, hoped that he could be with the team long-term, but is disappointed that the team has not had any talks about a long-term contract extension since March of 2023.
Yeah.
So, that is directly from Adam Schefter. You can clearly tell that his agent sent that over to Adam Schefter. He's frustrated. Like you just had this tag in the back pocket. You never really thought about keeping me long-term. So if you're not going to keep me long-term, let me go somewhere to see if I have long-term value somewhere else. So first thing, any surprises with Michael Pittman getting $24 million? Does it inform you of anything? And the second piece of it is, should the Giants be in the market if T. Higgins wants out of Cincinnati? Should the Giants be willing to give up draft capital and sign him to a long-term deal?
Yeah, the capital piece of it's the hard part, right? And what does that look like now? Because from a Bengals standpoint, you already have Jamar Chase, and while you want to have as many weapons as possible for Joe Burrow coming back this season, you do have to think about it relatively, right? Because when you go and extend out his contracts, it's hard. I don't care what the cap is. It's hard when you say you're going to pay, your two top wide receivers $60-ish million combined against your cap when you already have a franchise quarterback with his extension as well. So, I mean, I'll start with T. Higgins. I love T. Higgins. I think he's the perfect model of wide receiver to add in what the Giants currently have. If I have to give up a second round pick this year, a second round pick maybe the next year, and then pay him, again, do I think that the money is relative to what it'll be over the next couple of seasons in life of that contract? Of course. Do I think that if you trade for him and then structure the contract in a way that pushes it off for 1 or 2 years and big dollars come in, I think you can do that in a way that is palatable. The real question is, do you feel like the impact that he has to your wide receiver room in the short term and over the life of the contract is more valuable than the areas that you might address specifically in the draft if you're giving up a couple of picks? I don't think it's as cut and dry as it's too expensive. This is why you go get your guy in the draft, simply because the Giants have so many needs. Do I love the idea of going and getting one of the top 3 wide receivers should they fall there at 6? Of course I do. But I don't have a guarantee that that's the way the Giants are going. So I think you have to, combine these all together and say, what does that look like? And just to your point about offensive line and what they're getting paid, that changes the equation for the Giants and for every team now. Oh, this is going to be an expensive run on offensive line players in free agency, maybe this year and going forward for the next couple of seasons. If that's the case, then going to the draft to fix the offensive line becomes a potential factor as well, even though we know the developmental process there can cost you a season, certainly.
$24 million for Michael Pittman, who I think is a good player. I don't think he's an elite number
Yes,
one
and
type
yeah,
of
and I
wide
think that number
receiver.
seems a little high, maybe relatively speaking, but they know him in house, and they can't afford to lose him, right?
Correct. Sometimes you pay more because you can't afford to lose him rather than you need him on your team. Like it's a crazy dynamic there. We talk about Mike Evans getting about 26 million annually to be able to stay with the Buccaneers. If you trade for T. Higgins and you give up 2 second-round picks or a late first-round pick, and then you probably have to pay T. Higgins what, 28 million, 29 million dollars, and it screams to why the Giants should be interested in trying to get one of those top 3 wide receivers with the 6th pick. We've mentioned it before. If you feel okay about if you want to make a change of quarterback and you like any of the 3 quarterbacks, and you've done your due diligence on the wide receivers and you see you like all 3 of them, the chances are that one of those wide receivers will be there at 6 rather than one of the quarterbacks, because teams just inherently trade up for quarterbacks. But think about it. It costs a first round or 2 second-round picks and $28 million to solve your wide receiver problem. Or you can take the 6th pick and lock in team cost control on a wide receiver for 5 years before you have to do anything with that wide receiver. So to me, when you see these market numbers, you understand that you have to overpay in certain areas. Guard seems like it's going to be one place the Giants are going to overpay. To overpay a wide receiver in the free agent market may take $28-30 million, which to me just seems like the wrong approach for the Giants to take based on where they are right now.
Yeah, it probably is. Like at the end of it all, am I going to say, oh, you blew it by not going after T. Higgins? Obviously not. And again, if he was a free agent right now, I think we'd be having a different discussion in terms of, is it worth $28 million? We'd also be having a different discussion if the Giants had more room to work with underneath the cap, right? If you're, again, I keep going back to the Houston Texans as one of the examples. If you're the Houston Texans, you want to throw some money around, it's all relative to what you have going on. So we'll see how it plays itself out there. I'm also curious to see, as we start to hear about free agents, some of the mid-tier wide receivers, right? Like, who are a couple of these guys? Because when we think about the Giants wide receiver room, yes, I say go back and look at those numbers again with Wan'Dale Robinson. I think he's been underrated in that year number 2. We need to see Jalen Hyatt step up, the route trees really become an integral part of the offense. You still have Darius Slayton there, but they need to supplement something there too. If you told me that you go in at 6 overall and you grab whichever wide receiver it's going to be, good for you. I'm not going to sit there and say that's like completely enough. I still want to have one more guy in that room that safeguards against injuries, that brings in a dynamic and a proven commodity, something well above going and getting Paris Campbell a year ago, which was, has injuries, sometimes flashes, maybe he can, he can't. Cannot have wasted allocation this offseason if you're the Giants and Joe Schoen. The choices you make, even at a bargain level, need to be successes to whatever degree you need them to play in this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, under contract, we know Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Jalen Hyatt are all there, but Sterling Shepard's a free agent. Paris Campbell is obviously not going to be on this roster. Isaiah Hodgins is someone like, would the Giants potentially bring him back? Like, how does his situation work? Ultimately, you're going to want to have 6 wide receivers in the room at minimum, anyways. So Adam, even if they go out in the first round and draft a wide receiver, they're still going to have to make an ancillary move for a depth piece at wide receiver or number 3 type wide receiver. I don't know if I necessarily see them in the business for someone like, say, Tyler Boyd of the Cincinnati Bengals, who may get $7 to $9 million on the open market. But it is a way to think about cost controlling your wide receiver room and making it better if you do draft a wide receiver 1 and pay one of these, mid-tier, low-tier wide receivers to round out the room.
And one of my last notes on this too, just from the wide receiver perspective, regardless of the Giants being involved or not, when you go and look at it, remember guys like Jalen Waddle, guys like Jamar Chase, you go down the list to Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave is a couple years in. He hasn't the health. There's been the flashes, but not quite, cemented there. But when you walk through the list here, there's 3, 4, 5 guys that are going to be coming up over the next couple of seasons to get paid. Anybody that signs T. Higgins for $28 million, 2 years from now, he's going to be getting paid like the 10th, 11th highest paid wide receiver, and you're probably getting commiserate production out of him. So it is, again, it's relative to the position, but it matters how much you're going to spend and the other positions of need that you have. Let's go ahead and back this thing up another big step here. Let's just clean up some of this QB conversation that's going on here, which, by the way, includes, obviously, we know it includes impacts for the Giants and what's going to happen. One team I'll just throw in quickly here, the New England Patriots, who have a ton of cap space in free agency. They're moving on finally from Mac Jones. He's going to end up on the Jaguars. They look like they are going into a bit of rebuilding mode. They've put multiple veteran wide receivers on the trade block here as well, as we start to hear some of the free agent rumors. They look like they're going full rebuild mode, and that's going to impact the number 3rd overall pick and whether or not we think there's opportunities for the Giants to move. Veterans like Russell Wilson, while he popped by East Rutherford for a visit on his way to Pittsburgh, I said at the time, Pittsburgh made the most sense for him. That's where he's going to go, the minimum. Let Denver Broncos pay the tab. This makes sense to me. Do you feel like there's anything missed here from a Giants perspective?
I wish I could give credit because I saw it on Twitter, but someone said Steelers Nation, let's weld. And I just thought that was like brilliant. I'm
good.
like, how did I not? How was I not the first person to come up with that? Because everyone was thinking like, what's the next analogy? Adam, you're absolutely right. Pittsburgh made the most sense. I made the case over the last couple of shows that the Giants should have interest and would be foolish. It would be a no-brainer for the Giants to not bring Russell Wilson in or try to sign him because of the contract situation. He is going to cost the veteran minimum at $1.21 million, which is crazy to think about because the Denver Broncos and the way the contract is structured only have offset language in what he was going to cost. So it's going to cost the Broncos $37 million for Russell Wilson to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is mind-blowing. But it made a ton of sense for a whole host of reasons. But number one is there is less financial ties to Kenny Pickett than there is Daniel Jones. Right. On top of that, like Kenny Pickett hasn't entered his second contract where the Giants are on the hook for this big number and the current regime is the one that signed it. It's like, no, he's a guy that they were trying to move off of, question marks around his play. And they said they had to get better at the position. To be able to unseat him will be much easier. The other thing is Daniel Jones has done more in his career than Kenny Pickett has. He's won a road playoff game being the best player on the field, being the best quarterback on the field. And so that essentially is what got him the contract. And it would have been very difficult for Russell Wilson with very little protection or guarantees because of that $1.2 million to be able to come in and feel confident that he was going to take over the lead role because the Giants are already paying someone else a ton of money to be the quarterback on their roster. So it did make sense for us to go to Pittsburgh. It's his best chance to start. Obviously, Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers are a model of consistency, good defense, good weapons. It feels like it's a natural fit, and I expect Russ to be the starter and do well in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I've seen some things, a couple of guys that interact in and around the Giants and saying, Russell Wilson will go there, should make for an interesting QB competition. It's not a competition. The Pittsburgh Steelers, in my opinion, are looking at that situation and saying, Kenny Pickett is not going to be the guy. At a minimum, we need to sit him down. I would be shocked if Russell Wilson is not named the starter somewhat early in camp for them to clearly set the table for what they are. And oh, by the way, as you mentioned, consistent team. They have weapons there. You put a veteran quarterback in. Even if he produces, we understand you reined him in. He's not the same dynamic playmaker out of the QB spot that he once was. But if you can get 26-9, 26-8, and 67% completion percentage, and you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think you can paint yourself a nice playoff appearance picture, maybe an opportunity to win some big games along the way. That being the case, go ahead. Yeah, what else you got?
I was just going to say, to round out the quarterback market, we could talk about Baker Mayfield. Who, good story. Obviously, kind of had a tough time after he left the Cleveland Browns, went to the Carolina Panthers. That was an absolute mess. Maybe it was more of an indication of how much of a tire fire the Carolina Panthers were, rather than how bad Baker Mayfield's play was. Had a cup of coffee with the Rams, then signed for about $6.5 million with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, led them to the playoffs, led them to a win. All feel good situations for the Buccaneers. They signed a 3-year, $100 million deal with Baker Mayfield, with I believe about $40 million in guarantees. So they guaranteed a little bit more than $50 million in guarantees. All of year one guaranteed, some of year two guaranteed with money on the back end. And it's interesting because everyone said he should not accept a penny less than what Daniel Jones signed for, which is that $40 million benchmark. He signed for about $7 million annually less than what Daniel Jones did. Do you look at the Daniel Jones contract being a one-off? Do you look at the Baker Mayfield taking less money and now maybe developing a mid-tier quarterback market as a one-off? Like, which way do you think that the tide swings on this?
I'll use one of your favorite phrases that listen, the Giants capologists were drunk. You handed out a 4-year, $160 million deal. We understand there's the 2-year out, right? If the Giants want to cut ties next off season, they can designate it on a post June 1 cut and only take 11 million in dead cap, free up 30 million plus in cap space. All great, all good. No one else was paying Daniel Jones that money. Even coming off of the playoff win, if the Giants had said, we messed up, we didn't pick up the 5th-year option, you were hurt, then you came back, you won the playoff game. Listen, by the way, they should have done with Daniel Jones if they wanted to keep him. This actually, and we forget to bring this up, they should have done exactly what they did with Saquon Barkley, exactly what they're doing with Xavier McKinney. Go ahead, go to the market and let the market set the price point for you. Instead, you got a little bit nervous, right? You realized you'd made the mistake with the 5th year, the injuries and all those things. You kind of overshoot it. Again, it's a short-term 2-year band-aid you can get out from underneath. But no, nobody was going to pay him that contract on the open market. And I think that was the blip, not the trend. And Baker Mayfield, who has been successful and certainly has turned himself around with Tampa Bay, maybe there's something there about stability, right? And getting a good payday. And Mike Evans came back, so you like your opportunity there. But I wouldn't have suspected that if Baker Mayfield walked freely into the market, that some team was going to show up and say, we'll pay you $40+ million a year annually, maybe on a shorter 2-year deal, but not getting that 3rd year at the back end of it.
Yeah, overall, I think it's understandable. I think there is going to be a regression back to saying, listen, if you're a top 10 quarterback and you're coming up to get paid, you're going to get paid top of the line money. Mm-hmm. But there hasn't been an avenue for teams and players for quarterbacks that are in that 12 to 18 range where it's like you're good enough to make the playoffs, but you're not good enough to maybe be the catalyst of a playoff team or the playoff run, but you can certainly guide the ship. It felt like you had to make a decision. Either you were going to pay them top of the line money or you're going to have to let them go. This Baker Mayfield contract makes it seem like maybe there is going to be middle ground where the elites make 50 and somewhere around $30 million is the going rate for an established starting quarterback that may not be top 10 in his position.
100%. Let's talk a little bit here then about the top of the draft and what goes on with this QB position. We talked about there briefly the New England Patriots. It looks like they're trying to strip some things down and rebuild. Whether or not that is an indication that they see it as a longer-term project and they're willing to open up the number 3 pick to really get a lot of draft capital to build, or that they're going to draft their guy, they're going to bring him along and start to fill those pieces in around over the next couple of years. The Justin Fields of it all is certainly very interesting in where he ends up landing, because relative to the Atlanta Falcons at 8, maybe Minnesota, maybe the Denver Broncos and what they're going to be doing at the position, there's a few teams, as you work your way down towards the middle of this first round draft, that are going to be in that discussion. What is your opinion right now as it stands on Justin Fields and whether or not any team, and we can go ahead and include even the New York Giants in this discussion if we want to, and the impact that it's going to have relative to it, because that money, that 5th-year option, everything about that circumstance with Chicago is pretty difficult. And we can get to that in a second if you want to address anything else that's coming in here, just to be clear.
So a little bit of breaking news is the Titans are expected to sign running back Tony Pollard per a league source. So it looks like the Titans found their replacement for Derrick Henry. I'm not seeing any details on what the contract structure is, but if the Giants
would you sign Derrick Henry?
What's up?
Would you sign Derrick Henry if you were the Giants?
Of course I would sign. Yeah. I mean, it's all relative to the money, but if you're like, do you want an absolute monster at the running back position for a year? Sure. I'm in on that. Count me in. But yes, do I want him at $14 million a year? No, I would rather spend my money elsewhere. But the reason why I wanted to bring up the Tony Pollard piece is because Connor Hughes and other, beat writers for the Jets and the Giants had speculated that the Giants would quickly pivot to someone like Tony Pollard if Saquon Barkley signs elsewhere. Well, it sounds like Tony Pollard's gone. The musical chairs of the running back position are happening very, very quickly. I was listening. I wish I could give credit where credit's due, but I was listening to someone say, you don't want to be the last one to sign during this running back market. You want to set it to make sure you get whatever your number is. Even if it's a little bit less than what you were hoping for, Adam, you want to be the one to set the market, because as these musical chairs fall, they don't see someone overpaying for the guy that's left at the end. They think like, well, now it's a distressed asset. It's a buyer's market. Like, I think I can get this guy at a significant discount. And if I don't, I could probably just go into the draft and get someone. So interesting to see Tony Pollard and DeAndre Swift off the board. And we're kind of just sitting back here. I mean, makes sense for the Titans, though, right?
Oh yeah, well, 100%. You know, I will say the funny thing being, it's like they found the replacement for Derrick Henry, and it's Tony Pollard. Like the two models of running back that couldn't be any different in terms of what they are at the position. But you need to bring in quality players, and I think it's a good move certainly for the Titans, who are in a bit of a transition for themselves. They have their young quarterback, but they're moving on from an era of playoff football, maybe to taking a bit of a gap year here before they get back competitive. The other thing I'll just note too is Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, to me, those are the two guys here, right? They were clearly a little bit above the Tony Pollards, even a little bit above Swift. It seemed perceptually better on where the market was going to project. That's what I think is fascinating here. Is Jacobs going to go back to the Raiders potentially? Is there another team that wants to come to the market for him? And to your point about you don't want to be the last guy, but there is this world where if the one or two teams and somebody doesn't get their guy, that quick pivot over to the other one remaining, right? So I wouldn't be shocked if those two deals maybe happened relatively quickly to one another. And I can actually see Derrick Henry maybe being the guy that ends up signing a below market value, quote unquote, based on age, timeline, and all that stuff, where he just kind of has to take a respectable 1-year option here at the back end of his career.
Well, it's going to be interesting because if the Titans are gaining Tony Pollard, it means the Cowboys now have an area of need at the running back position as well. And people had thrown the idea of Saquon Barkley going to Dallas as a potential option. I
Sure.
mean, once Tony Pollard signs elsewhere, it becomes more of a realistic possibility. I could see, I mean, picture this. If you're Jerry Jones and you want to make a splash, signing Saquon Barkley away from your division rival, or signing someone like Derrick Henry makes a whole lot of sense for the Dallas Cowboys when when you talk about the brand and the
Mm-hmm.
entertainment value and all that different stuff. So I wouldn't rule out the Dallas Cowboys making a move. What just something that just came out a minute ago, Ryan Dunleavy from the Post. If you're thinking about Xavier McKinney, he has a little bit of insight for you. He came out and said, I heard Giant Xavier McKinney was seeking more than top 5 safety money, aka north of 16 million per year. He might get it.
Yeah, he
So
said he
like,
wanted. That's what he said he wanted. He said he wants to be paid as one of the top guys at the position, and I respect him for it as well. He should, but that's where that number then looks. That number looks north of 15, 16, towards $17 million on the open market. But as we know, a lot of free agents came flooding into that as well. So that's going to be impacted there slightly. It's just how do they view him relative to veterans, guys that are 29, 30 years old, even 28. We talked about with the release out there in Seattle for their safety, whose name's escaping me for a moment, former Jet. But you know what I mean? Like
Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs both got let go. Yes.
So, like, you know what I mean? It's all relative, the age and the longevity. And this, again, I'll say again, if you are a team who's looking at the safety spot and you see a 24-year-old on the market, while the numbers look big in year 3 and year 4, the numbers are going to look better and better relative to cap around the NFL.
Okay, but Adam, here's something I want to run by you. So when we talk about the safety position, we talk about he's seeking more than 16 million per year. This is some of the highest. I just grabbed this very, very quickly, but the highest paid safeties in 2023 average salary per year. Listen to this and tell me which of the teams would do it all over again if they could sign that safety.
Yeah.
Because I find this fascinating. Okay, so number 1 is Derwin James of the Chargers at $19 million a year.
I mean, he's a really good player, but probably not. No.
Okay, Steelers safety Minkah Fitzpatrick making $18.2 million a year.
They might do that again.
Yeah, I feel like he's a leader. He embodies Pittsburgh. Right. I feel like that one's pretty decent. Seahawks safety Jamal Adams, $17.5 million a year.
Well, they traded for that too, so that was a mess on several levels. There's no world they do that again.
They just released him. They instantly regret that. Falcon safety Jesse Bates, $16 million a year.
Nah, I'm probably fine on that.
And they just did that almost a year ago, Adam. So, like, when you think about that one, like, they just did that a year ago. You're like, I don't know. Vikings safety Harrison Smith, $16 million a year.
Oh, I think they're probably fine with that. They'd probably do it again.
Off-season reports state that the Vikings are looking to cut, spend, and Harrison Smith is one of the main players that they could free up cap space to get rid of at that $16 million a year.
And now I guess again to like the one wrinkle, and we understand the overall takeaway here from this list.
Oh,
Everybody
wait.
has.
I'm
Go
not,
ahead.
I'm not done yet.
Go ahead.
I got to keep going. Broncos safety Justin Simmons, sixth highest paid at $15.25 million.
Well,
He
they'd regret
just
that
got
now.
released by the team.
Well, yeah, because that team has $85 million in dead money here with this whole situation with Russell Wilson. But that it's relative, but they need to shed money any which way but loose. They are a monster seller here.
Right. So you have him. I'm just saying in a vacuum. I don't know if you're in cap hell. Do you really want a safety making $15 million? They decided no. Then you have Cardinal safety Budda Baker making $14.75 million. Maybe, maybe.
Fine.
And I'll go just a little bit further just because we can round out the top 10.
Yeah.
8 is Bear safety Eddie Jackson making $14.6 million. He just got released. 9th is Raven safety Marcus Williams at $14 million. They were talking about him potentially being restructured or taking a lower salary. And number 10 is Seahawks safety Quandre Diggs at $13 million. He also just got released. So when you think about the top 10 safeties and how much they're being paid, you can argue that maybe only the Steelers at Minkah Fitzpatrick would sign up for the contract that they gave to make that person the top 10 highest paid at their position. Do you think that should factor into this at all?
Of course it should. Like, I mean, like, and by the way, like, and it's triple fold here. And this isn't it's not a knock on Xavier McKinney. It's the overall, right? When you look inside this Giants defense right now, what do we applaud Joe Schoen for? You went out, you got Bobby Okereke, right? You brought in a vocal leader. He immediately became the guy that was setting up the defense, green dot wear, right? Getting them in their spots. You have Dexter Lawrence up in front of him, a game wrecker on the front end, right? You feel like Banks is going to come into his own. All of these things, like, I think it matters. You mentioned Fitzpatrick. Like, it matters what is that player at that position to your team and to that side of the football. If he is the vocal leader and he's the guy that in the critical moments is going to make those big plays, it is one thing. But if you already have some money allocated to different positions, and if you don't have a defense that you feel like is critically dependent on that role in that way, right? The Bo fan, hey, I need you down in the box thumping. I need you on the back end. I need you covering up for mistakes and all the little growth spurts that we're going to have throughout the course of our defense and the building blocks and all that stuff. It all becomes relative. And as good as Xavier McKinney was this past season, I do think it's worth remembering 1 year prior and coming into this year, you and I had the conversation and said, listen, the Giants had gotten lucky when he fell to the second round. But I wouldn't have said that he had lived up to expectations until this past year. Young player taking a big step forward, but that does matter. And I think if you're the Giants, you have to make an association of, if we pay him 16 AAV, how many years? 2 years from now, will we be saying, boy, is this a problem for us? And are we occupying X amount of our cap in a space? And we just went and got Pinnock. We pulled him off the practice squad. I'm not saying it's 1-to-1 or equal, but when you see sometimes the value that you can find at a position other ways, just like running back, it does start to make you reevaluate whether or not you want to spend those big dollars.
Well, Adam, it's not even just 16. He wants more than 16. Like, that's the point. Like, what is the number that it gets to? It gets to be a little bit crazy when you think about allocation versus success rate. I mean, you look at the top 10 safeties that I just mentioned in terms of annual salaries, and Minkah Fitzpatrick is the only one that worked out for the duration of the contract. So it's tough for me to think that the Giants are going to pay Xavier McKinney whatever the market dictates. And if he's going to go to whoever pays him the most, he's not going to be a Giant. I think the Giants are standing firm at somewhere around 15 million, maybe like top 10 money, but not top 3 money. And they're saying, like, go out and see what you can get on the open market and let us have an opportunity to see if you want to come back. It doesn't really make sense.
Before we get into an update here around the running back spot, just very quickly, we'll note, if you're over on YouTube or on Twitter, thanks for being a part of the conversation. Smith coming in with all the money the NFL throws around, overpaying Saquon Barkley $1 million or $2 million is inconsequential. It's really not true, though. Like, I understand where you're coming from, right? Well, they say you want to pay him 10, he's going to go get 12 on the market. We'll just give you the extra 2 million. While you can, and I know it's relative to different players and positions, but if that's your policy, then why not just overdo it on Xavier McKinney? The money gets thrown around. Why not just do it on wide receiver X? Just do it on player Y. all of the sudden, and we've seen the Giants make some of these mistakes in the margins in free agency, you ended up spending, it was no big deal for the cost to sign Paris Campbell until you realized that he was a non-factor and you had a problem with a guy like Glowinski who wasn't living up to his contract either. We thought that contract was a good value at the time. When you make mistakes with money, doesn't matter if it's $2 million or $10 million, it impacts what your team can do and the type of adjustments you make. So, as we'll continue to highlight some other comments here in just a second, we go back to the running back room, back to Tony Pollard, and highlight that it looks like his numbers, Andy, are going to be 3 for 24, rating that $8 million AAV. Is this impacting at all where you think Saquon Barkley's market is? Because again, those two running backs off the board so far, Swift and Pollard now, Barkley is still a cut above those guys. I think we all agree that. It's just a matter how much more dollars is that worth?
Well, that's the whole thing. You're seeing tier 2 market develop. It is around 8 million. I'm expecting Tony Pollard's guarantees to be in the 15 million range. It looks like, Tony Pollard and DeAndre Swift had a similar market. Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, is it going to be 2 million, 3 million, 4 million more than these guys are getting annually? Right. That's going to be the biggest, dictator of this whole thing. If I'm curious to make sure that we see exactly what the guarantees are going to be coming out for Tony Pollard, but we're seeing the market kind of blend itself out. I saw a tweet that came out just about the DeAndre Swift signing and the pushback teams are getting for signing running backs. And Sam Hoppin, who follows the Bears, said Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert, two solid running backs, have a combined cap hit of $2.2 million this year.
Right.
And you felt the need to go sign Swift and guarantee him $8 million this upcoming year. Like, why do that? And that's an interesting thing because DeAndre Swift was a desirable player on the market. He's not the biggest name like Saquon Barkley is, but he's still a very good running back. He had really good numbers with the Philadelphia Eagles last year. Are you surprised that teams signing these second-tier running backs are getting more pushback from people that follow the team than expected?
No, because of the way the position has been treated, right? It'd be because of the way, and we talk about it that same way too. We're having that discussion with Saquon Barkley. It's not worth doing it. You can go to the draft. It's an expendable position. You see how these players come in and have instant success. So I'm not surprised by it because I think the overall from fan bases in general is like we don't need to pay a running back anything, essentially. Now, would I be fascinated if it was Saquon Barkley, if it was Jacobs, if it was the clear number one tier, how fan bases would feel about it? Sure. The other thing that I think that sometimes does get lost in it is positional and situational value. If you're the Chicago Bears, if you're one of these teams and you look at a player and say, we're going to be bringing in a rookie quarterback, and if we bring in Swift, it just elevates our room by X factor. And we're going to have one of those other two running backs in our backfield come up for a contract within the next 2 seasons, and they're not coming back. Like, they're not going to be a part of this, so we can afford to dedicate money a year or two ahead of time, knowing where we're going to be 2 seasons down the road.
Related to the Tony Pollard signing with the Tennessee Titans, Diana Rossini just tweeted out the Dallas Cowboys were in on Tony Pollard, looking to re-sign him, obviously. Mm-hmm. They said the Giants and the Vikings had their eye on him, too. He took the bigger payday with Tennessee, per sources.
Okay, so hold on a second. So from a Giants perspective, this is
Correct.
what this tells you.
Correct.
I don't think there's anything that Saquon Barkley is getting offered on the open market that the Giants are going to have an appetite to re-sign him for. Not because Tony Pollard is as good as him, but if you're saying that $8 million AAV for Tony Pollard was the best deal he had, and the Giants were maybe closer to what Spot Track had it at $6.6 million AAV, that means that the Giants aren't even probably as close to the $9.9 million AAV projected for Saquon Barkley as other teams are going to be willing to go there. Like, I just think, to me, it sounds like Joe Schoen and the Giants have this hard cap kind of figure, whatever that number is, 9.5, maybe even a little bit less. And they're only trying to dance in certain waters. And it does go back to what you said. Oh, would you sign Saquon for 12 or Pollard for 6? I think the Giants were thinking we would sign Pollard for 6, but it turns out someone wants to give him 8, and that takes us out of the running.
Yeah, I mean, I found that fascinating too, that the Giants, even for the second tier, aren't willing to pay market value for what the second tier running back group is. So to me, it feels like
Giants are more of a third tier team and more of a draft team when it comes to the running back spot.
Well, I'm curious if they're like, we'll make one exception for one player who's a known commodity in our building, and we're willing to pay him more than we would any other person at his position. Because, if they were in on Tony Pollard and they didn't want to spend $8 million a year, like, then it's got to be an interesting dichotomy. You know, license plate guy who's a huge fan of the Giants, seems to know a lot of things. He said 3 for 38 to 40 seems like the number that it's going to be for the guy that we all know and love. So like he's thinking that it's going to take 12 and a half, 13, 12 and a half million annually.
Yep.
And then the question is, Adam, okay, so that would look like a 3-year, $39 million, maybe $40 million deal with 24 million guaranteed and an average of 12 and a half million. So like he guaranteed the first 2 years. I don't think the Giants have the appetite for that.
Yeah, I mean, would I be fine if they did that with Saquon Barkley? Yes. Like, I don't think that's an insane number. I don't think they will. And I personally would spend the money elsewhere. Like, you know what I mean? I wouldn't feel one way or the other about it. And I will just say at a high level, I look at the Saquon situation more as being symbolic about where the organization is and where they need to start to go about signing him or not signing him. Letting him go in free agency is the symbolic. We're moving on from that version of this team, just like with Daniel Jones, and it'll happen next offseason. We're moving on from that version of this thing, and we're starting to bring in pieces that feel like it makes this team look like Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll's and look less like Dave Gettleman's. Because guess what? The guys we're talking about are Dave Gettleman guys and his draft class. And if you're a GM and a coach, you want your fingerprints to be all over your team, and that feels symbolic of it. Before you give just real quick here, I want to hit just so we make sure we're doing justice by some of our fans talking in the chat here over on YouTube real quick here. So Ryan had thrown up this one about what position they make a splash with first. And I'm just going to double these down with a couple other ones. Yes, Ryan, I understand he's not just a player. He is not, though, the face of the franchise. He could be the face of the franchise, but Joe Schoen and the Giants have gone out of their way to make sure that he is not. If whatever you think of it, better or worse, that's the direction that they've chosen to go. Then we just had Brian come in here really quick with two things. One that Andy will love. Giants probably go after Singletary. He mentioned him early in the process, believe that he maybe actually could be a big value because you'd probably put him on third tier running back, maybe like behind those other guys. So maybe that's where the Giants find their value. And then this one, I'll take a nice little victory lap on. Giants probably make a splash by signing Bryce Huff. He's the player that I had spotlighted when we talked about top 50 talents. I think he'd make a lot of sense for this team, but we also need to keep our eye on that offensive line play as well. Andy, go ahead. What do we got?
It dovetails into what you were just talking about. I do think the Giants are looking to make a splash in the offensive line or edge rushing areas. They clearly need help alongside Kayvon Thibodeau. We know we've talked ad nauseum about how they need specifically guard help, maybe right tackle help, depending on how you feel about Evan Neal. One of the dominoes in the edge rushing group has fallen. Former Texans pass rusher Jonathan Greenard is signing a 4-year, $76 million deal that includes $42 million guaranteed with the Vikings. So he's
26 years old, like right in the wheelhouse, prime guy coming into his prime right now.
He was 10th in sacks last year. Mina Kimes said he finished 6th in pass rush win rate as part of the Houston Texans. So 26 years old, guy that's in the prime of his career. This is the type of money that you pay. A 4-year deal at $76 million, Adam, is $18-ish million, right? 18 and a half, something like that, 19, which is probably the area that your boy Bryce Huff is going to be living in. So if the Giants want to make a splash, it looks like the edge rushing position is going to be $18 to $20 million. How does that sit with you? What are your initial thoughts?
How it sits with me just it's that this money has gotten so funny so quickly. Like again, when we talked about the top 50 talents, these were guys looking to earn anywhere from $8-9 million up to maybe $14 million on the open market. And some of these players like Huff, like he's coming off a great season, but that was kind of he put it all together this year. What is the risk that you're taking on giving a player like this a big contract and maybe seeing some regression from him? I don't think it's a big concern, but it certainly exists. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Again, based on the way that the market and the cap space has gone up, I think you have to look at most positions of high value, not ones that are flooded, not ones like safety or running back, and say, yep, tack on an extra $2-3 million. Now, I'm trying to remember back. I'm pretty sure that at the time it was like hey, listen, if you can sign Bryce Huff for an AAV of, $10.5 to $12.5 million. So it does hurt the brain to think about overinvesting, but you already have Kayvon Thibodeau, high draft pick and under his rookie contract, which is still decent money. So you also have to think about it that way, right? If I package together the 19 million, I think Thibodeau's making like somewhere in the 6-7-ish kind of range, if I'm not mistaken. So now you're talking, okay, our edge rushing room is allocating about mid 20 million combined, right? Like that's also a part of this. How do we spend portions of our cap on the position group and feel like we're getting value?
Okay, I agree with you. The one footnote before I pivot to some more news that's come out
Oh yeah.
is who would have thought that the guard market was going to make more money than the edge rushing market in free agency, right? Like
Yes.
these guards are getting 21 million. Jonathan Greenard is only getting 18 and a half, 19 million on the open market. Like who saw that coming?
Remember, by the way, too, if you remember that we had said this, and it's been getting said that offensive linemen are not coming out of college as NFL ready as they used to. It's more of a process. It's more of a grind. So guys that got here, proved it, developed, and look like they can be consistent players for you. Now that's where the premium money is going. Hey, we need to have a player that when he starts, we mean that he starts successfully, not, well, we'll see. Maybe 5 possessions will be good. Maybe the next 12 snaps will look like total garbage, and we'll just allocate $6 to $10 million that we're basically flushing down the drain year over year.
I agree. It is interesting. Like edge rusher, you can get an edge rusher that has the raw intangibles that could still get to the quarterback. The guard position or offensive tackle, like you need to learn so much technique in order to play it. But go ahead.
No. We also just had, I don't know if we had hit this up earlier. This is now going back a ways. You may have mentioned this and I could have blacked out that Deion Dawkins was signing back with the extension with the Bills at $60.5 million over a 3-year deal. 4th highest paid tackle in the league as well. So obviously averaging a little north of 20 million AAV to keep him around with Buffalo.
He initially tweeted out before any news, like, it's been real, Buffalo. Thanks for the memories. I appreciate it. On to my next chapter. And I was going to say something. I was like,
just to make him
this
scramble.
doesn't really make sense because like he's in line for an extension and I waited. And then like the news came out and he came out like, got you all. I'd never leave Buffalo. I'm a Buffalo guy for life. I'm like, it was like, you're like trolling your own fan base. I don't fully understand why you would do that, but neither here nor there. He's got about 20 million annually. He's locked into being Buffalo for a while. Connor Hughes of SNY just tweeted out, which triangulates to what LPG was just saying on Twitter. There are increased rumblings that the Eagles are willing to go north of 12 million annually for Saquon Barkley per sources. That's higher than the Texans, which are believed to be near 11 million. This would be a splash for Howie Roseman. The sentiment was always that Barkley would give the Giants a chance to match or do better. Would Shane try to keep Barkley away from a division rival at $12 million?
Again, I understand the thinking, right? You make your team better by keeping the 2nd overall pick, 2018 draft, and a heck of a player. And you also weaken your opponent in the Eagles. I get it. But I'm pretty sure, in spite of loving Curb Your Enthusiasm and the idea of a spite store, I don't think spite signings end up working out in the end, right? Right, wrong, indifferent. You have your perspective on Saquon Barkley and where his value is and what you're willing to spend on him. You cannot all of a sudden pivot where your stance because, oh no, the Eagles are going to spend 12.5 million. We can't possibly let them go there. It would seem, again, like a bad structure to have had internal discussions about Saquon Barkley, say we're going to let him go to the free agent market, and then say, listen, 10.5 million, that's probably the most we would go. 10 million is our cap. Unless, of course, then we'll start to pivot and panic and put more money into that. As it stands right now, the Giants not making any noise or rumblings about signings right now, I would say is at least noteworthy because they have 2 high-profile free agents looking to make big money. I wonder if this is what's going on, waiting to see where the market is before they go and make decisions about other positions of need. You just hope you don't miss out on something else as you wait for Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, and those positional markets to kind of clarify.
It is interesting because Ian Rappaport tweeted out the deal about Tony Pollard and the Giants Insider podcast, which some people have polarizing opinions about. Basically said Barkley is set for the $9 to $10 million annually year range. And that he just tweeted that out 1 minute ago, or they just tweeted it out 1 minute ago. That seems to fly in the face of what everyone else is saying, which is The Texans are going to pay more money than that. The Landon Dickerson extension that they did in Philadelphia freed up cap space for this season to be able to make some of these different splash moves. I'm curious to hear how all this works. You're hearing that the Eagles and the Giants are also among the teams that are linked to pass rusher Bryce Huff. So depends on what the price is, according to Connor Hughes again, who seems to be in tap with what everyone's trying to do and what decisions are going to be made.
Bakhtiari announced his Pro Bowl left tackle, announced that he is being released by the Green Bay Packers today. That's about 15 minutes ago, care of Schefter. A lot of emotions coming from David Bakhtiari in this. I just want to say thank you to Green Bay. Thank you for the 11 seasons. It's been I'll say heck, because we keep it clean here, of a run. I always wanted to raise Lombardi on Lombardi Avenue, but I will never complain. I gave it my all. I always gave it my best, no matter the circumstances. Hey, do you feel like this goes on here from there? He's 32 years old, obviously. Do I assume that the New York Jets are going to start having a discussion about this? Of course they are. Like, it only seems natural that somebody's going to want to get into the mix on this player.
I mean, come on. Aaron Rodgers is going to make a phone call, say, pay whatever you want to this guy.
Aaron Rodgers, New York Jets GM, is going to make this deal himself.
Aaron Rodgers is going to say, I'm not a good chugger of beers. I have to sit on the floor seats at Madison Square Garden. Can you please get David Bakhtiari next to me? So he's the one that's taking the 12-ounce curls next to me and not me. That alone is worth $15 million on a one-year deal. Align his deal with my deal. We'll both ride off in the sunset. It makes too much sense. The Giants aren't really in the David Bakhtiari business, I don't think, especially after all of his injuries, especially when he could go cross town and be with one of his close.
At a minimum, at least you get, from a Giants perspective or any team, right? That's another body on the market. Feel free. Another veteran body on the market for, the difference. One thing we hadn't mentioned here too over the course of this is win now mode, right? Teams are in win now mode will spend money on 32 and 33-year-old players. You brought this up when it came to the safety position, Poyer from Buffalo, a lot of Buffalo players, maybe some ties, Tennessee players, obviously with Bowen on the defensive side, and just saying like, what's the right spot here? What's the right price point? And I don't want to sell it short of saying, oh, well, if they're over 31 years old, I can't possibly sign any of them. But also, it has to be relative to what you think you're getting in terms of production at that player, right? Like, so there will be teams that think our window is right now this season and next season. We'll sign a 32-year-old to a 2 or 3 year contract. I always feel like that is relative when you are a middle back end of the pack kind of team. I would never allocate extra money to veterans. I would almost take the chance on, and this is different, he's a high-end guy on the market, but like Bryce Huff, I'd say, well, I'll quote-unquote, overpay a little bit to get Bryce Huff before I would pay to get the established veteran at nearly the same dollar for dollar amount.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Poyer is going to be an interesting one because of the ties to Joe Schoen, Brian Dable, obviously strong Buffalo ties there. He could not have to uproot his family and move to the West Coast or go somewhere else if he came down to the Giants. The Giants clearly have an area of need if they decide not to sign Xavier McKinney. I mean, Jordan Poyer at going to be 33 years old at the start of next season. He still played at a high rate when he was healthy in the last few seasons. Yeah. It would seem like a decent signing for the Giants if they can get him in the Adam? $6 to $8 million range. Ugh. It's like you pay him on a 2-year deal, $6 to $8 million. Nope. You're saving $10 or $11 million per year on what you'd save for McKinney and put the money elsewhere.
Nope, no way. You're telling me $8 million for Poyer? I'm playing Pinnock. I'm playing Dane Belton. I'm playing Javarius Owens, and maybe I'm looking at the draft in the middle rounds to add a player in if you want to. I am not allocating anything close to $8 million to the safety room. Not with what feels like, again, first of all, he's a fine player, but he's not a great player, or even obviously with what you're going to pay him. But also, unless you're telling me there's a restructure coming here for for Andrew Thomas or something to free up more money. Again, the Giants still have, listen, they made some releases. They have $38 million coming into this situation. They do not have limitless funds here in order to operate with. And with the way we're talking about offensive line players, 65% of that could be gone in the signing of one player this offseason. Though, as we've said before, and we'll reiterate here, you have to remember that obviously you can backload some contracts here to keep yourself flexible in the short term. I'm going to highlight one thing here, not because I like to give respect to our opponents within the division, but Charles K brought up Howie Roseman in Philly is desperate, could put the Eagles in a big puddle of S. Thanks for keeping it clean. We do appreciate that if things don't work out. On the one hand, I agree with you. Last season wasn't successful for them. On the other hand, he is notorious for being able to reconfigure, dismantle, reassess, reevaluate, pivot, and reconstruct rosters to be very quickly turnover successful in different ways. So when you talk about GMs and guys that know how to get it done and keep their team competitive, he's among the best of the GMs in the NFL. So I want it to be like that. And I think if it was Dave Gettleman, you go, we're absolutely screwed. There's no way that this guy makes any of the right decisions, but it's not. It's someone who has a pretty darn solid track record when it comes to those types of moves. I got to tell you, Andy, we're about a little over an hour here running live. We're probably going to start to tie a bow on it, at least for the time being. How disappointed are you that we've done this for over an hour? And the current news for the New York Football Giants is they've done nothing. And as it stands right now, we're not even getting the sniffing rumors about, outside of maybe some clarification on what they want to maybe pay Saquon Barkley. We're not really getting breadcrumbs about where they are right now. Joe Schoen at a minimum looks like he's being patient to see how some of these positional values unfold on the market.
So interesting that you say that. I think this is positive for the New York Giants. Most people are like, where are the signings? Well, why can't we get all these things happening? One is, if the Giants have the ability to match whatever, if Saquon truly is going to let them match whatever his highest offer is on the market, like the highest offer hasn't come back to the Giants yet for them to be able to sign. Because if the Giants had said thanks but no thanks, you'd hear the announcement that he's signing with another team. Also, if Xavier McKinney was just going to leave and take the money for the highest bidder, we probably would have gotten that information already out there of the team that's willing to give him $17 million a year. You know, you look at Michael Onwenu, who is one of the guards that the Giants are targeting. Keep in mind, Adam, he does not have an agent. He is representing himself. So all of the back channeling before the legal tampering, the illegal tampering that usually happens, is something that he couldn't really do and manufacture himself. So, like, I'm not surprised that you're not hearing any news from him, because as 12 o'clock hit, he's literally getting phone calls, probably trying to figure out who has interest in where his age, his range is for his contract. So I think it's encouraging to not hear any of the news, especially on the Giants' current players. What I will say is DJ Bien-Ami, pardon if I got that wrong, is a beat writer for the Houston Texans for ESPN. Just came out and said the Texans are being aggressive in going after Saquon Barkley more than Nick Caserio has been in regards to the running back position during his Texas tenure. So you're hearing Howie Roseman is getting aggressive. Nick Caserio is getting aggressive. All of these other people are getting aggressive for Saquon Barkley. It sounds like Joe Schoen wants to be the opposite of aggressive in the running back market. That's the one thing that concerns me if you're a Giant fan and want to be able to bring back Saquon Barkley.
Right. Relatively speaking, I'm fine with the patience of it. Again, my concern about not hearing rumors is that they're trying to do the both and. Well, we want to see what happens with the Saquon market. We want to see what happens with the Xavier McKinney market. And I can appreciate that. And at the same time, if you're waiting for that and another player comes off the board, another positional value, as I'll highlight here, not saying the Giants should have been in on this, but Jordan Schultz reporting that free agent safety Brandon Jones plans to sign a 3-year, $20 million deal with the Denver Broncos with upside to $22.5 million. Jones gets $12.5 million guaranteed per source. Like, these are, these type of players you mentioned, like Poyer, right? $6 to $8 million. Well, there you go, right? Somewhere between $6 to $7 million a year. If you wanted to be in that type of discussion and you're not, because you're waiting for the Xavier McKinney contract or to see where offers come in, that's all. Are you hedging yourself a little bit? Are you trying to play both sides for a little too long? Relatively speaking, as you mentioned, just about these active GMs, specifically when it comes to Saquon Barkley. Listen, the more that you hear active and rumblings is the more that Joe Schoen should be backing away from it. And I think out of the two positions, the marginal one is Saquon, because that feels the furthest away from being a reality, where Xavier McKinney, the age, and all those things, if that market stays closer to 14 than to 17, 18, I think the Giants are still in play for a return there.
So it's interesting. Brandon Jones was of the Miami Dolphins. He's 25 years old. He's going to be 26 when the league year starts. He had a 73 Pro Football Focus rating, 61 the year before that. Obviously, played better this past year than he did in previous years. But Adam, 3 years, $20 million for a 26-year-old safety on the market doesn't make it seem like the safety position has this robust market that everyone is talking about. Like,
right.
We're hearing that Nick Caserio and Howie Roseman are going to be ultra aggressive in the running back market. we just talked about why the safety position, the biggest contracts that have been signed, have been kind of fool's gold for a little while. It's going to be interesting. The Denver Broncos actually are the interesting team that ended up signing him, because they took a massive cap hit to be able to get him off their books at, the 15, 16, 17 million that he was getting per year. So they basically swapped out Justin Simmons for Brandon Jones and saved a couple million in cap overall when they knew what the commodity was in Justin Simmons. To me, that screams the market for the safeties out there is not going to be as robust as a lot of people are thinking. Is Brandon Jones, that half of what Xavier McKinney is? Is he 1.5? Xavier McKinney 1.5x of what Brandon Jones is? Like, when you think about the contract at $7.5 million, we're talking about Xavier McKinney asking for double that. To me, I think this is that signing is an indication that Joe Schoen will turn around and be like, yeah, we read the market right on the safety position. Like, maybe the running back position, we don't want to spend there. We know where it could go. But on the safety position, we're reading the room very well if this is what free agents are currently getting.
Of course. And again, that's the game, right? And by the way, again, I'll just quickly mention one thing before I do want to make sure we just touch on Justin Fields before we get out the door, because I think we teed that up and then a lot of other stuff happened. But it looks like value with Xavier McKinney and letting the market play itself out, that could end up working out. Saquon Barkley wise, again, just as a reminder, spot track wise, they had Pollard, they had Swift 6.5, 6.7. So even if it feels marginal, those numbers have gotten bigger here on the market at that second tier. So there's certainly something that seems to be happening when we talk about that. Before we even get to Justin Fields, though, Andy, we've got another one coming in about a potential, not going to be, Buffalo wide receiver that some Giants fans thought could be a nice sweet spot, second tier kind of target for Big Blue.
We talked about the wide receiver room being important for the Giants. We talked about it, addressing it in the draft. We talked about trying to sign in free agency. It's going to cost money. The figures aren't out yet, but former Bills wide receiver Gabe Davis is signing with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's expected to be a 3-year deal. Jacksonville obviously finds their replacement for Calvin Ridley. There's reports that Calvin Ridley has serious interest from the New England Patriots. So there's kind of a circle over here. Go ahead, Adam. Tell me more if you have some more on Gabe Davis.
No, I can finish up. I'll just give my perspective on that before I take there's some things coming up here that have gotten retweeted by Adam Schefter that seem interesting to me relative to T. Higgins, but I'm just trying to confirm it. On Gabe Davis, I said this, good value. I'll be very curious to see what the numbers are, because that I think plays a big factor here. And relatively speaking, as we keep saying, right, whether it was T. Higgins, high price guy, whether it was Michael Pittman, we mentioned him in the top 50. If he had gotten to the free agent market, stays with the Colts, obviously. These numbers, I'm waiting for a wide receiver in a contract that gets put out that I go, oh, now I would have done that if I was the Giants. As it stands right now, the numbers are so big, you go, okay, that's fine. Right? Like you keep saying, yeah, that's right. Draft them. Draft a wide receiver because these numbers seem pretty big. But Gabe Davis would be an interesting one, obviously, at a minimum.
Yeah, if the Jaguars couldn't sign Calvin Ridley, who's expecting top of the market money, I think, people were saying Calvin Ridley was expecting 18 million or something like that per year, especially with the figures that Michael Pittman got and Mike Evans got. You're expecting Gabe Davis to be at least in the $13 million to $15 million range. I mean, what would your expectation be? Mine is 3 for, I don't know, 14 million annually, 15 million annually. Like, what is Gabe Davis as a complimentary wide receiver number 2? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I'm sitting here being like, I wouldn't pay Gabe Davis more than $13 million a year. And if the Giants made a run at him, it's understandable that he probably didn't end up as a Giant.
No, yeah. Again, you're talking about like moves on the market. Michael Pittman being the example. If you compare those two players alone, understanding 24 versus we're talking $14 million, something for Gabe Davis, but Pittman, at least from a pedigree standpoint, from a draft stock standpoint, right? Everything about him projects to be that. And you saw him explode a little bit. And when you go look at the Colts, you say, well, this has not been a team that has given quarterback play that it would allow wide receivers to flourish. Whereas Gabe Davis, also playing with Stephon Diggs, right? Also playing with Josh Allen, you might look and say, and this I think does matter, it's like, are your numbers a little bit more inflated or successful relative to what you have there? And I think to invest in a player like that, if you're the Giants, by the way, I think this is true for a guy like for a guy like Darius Slayton in-house, like he's probably thinking, well, if I played for, a really top flight quarterback, maybe I'd be getting more money. I think you would see Gabe Davis come in and you might be scratching your head a little bit in the short term on a 3-year deal saying, why did we bring him in? We don't have the requisite talent at the QB spot to be successful.
Ian O'Connor, great reporter, has been a reporter in the New York space for quite a while, then became a national reporter. He talked about, at a high level, and I find this fascinating, and this is a question I'm going to pose to you. He tweeted, beloved New York athletes leaving for hated rivals. Saquon Barkley leaving the Giants for Philly would feel like Bernie Williams leaving the Yankees for the Boston Red Sox after the 1998 season.
But he never did.
Except George Steinbrenner stepped in and last minute refused to let it happen. Will John Mara do the same? And so here is that slippery slope that we go back to that everyone talks about. Like, we can't have John Mara meddling in the business of what Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are looking to do. But now all of a sudden it's another million or two that they're ready to let Saquon go. And they're like, will John Mara step in and just bridge the gap here and make it happen? How do you feel about the idea of John Mara being like, pay Saquon an extra $1.5 million?
Yeah, again, it is a good comp in terms of going to rivals, but I just pulled this up quickly in the background. I grew up as a Yankee fan, my grandfather watching them. By that point, right? So just to be clear, Bernie Williams was a 5-time All-Star for his career. He'd already been an All-Star in 97 before you get into that offseason. So he probably did it again in that following year and then was going to be a free agent. ALCS MVP in 96, 4-time Golden Glove Award winner, 97 to 2000, Silver Slugger Award in 02. This is after they choose to bring him back. AL batting champ in 1998. Like, he was a critical championship winning piece for the New York Yankees. And he was a two-way talent, which you can't be at the NFL. But, he was not only an incredible defensive outfielder playing in the center field for the Yankees, he was also a switch hitting slugger that could do it in all fields. Slugger is the wrong term there. An all field hitting, a bat at the plate. So he was the everything. And you had other big names on pitching staff and everything else for the Yankees in that run. But he mattered critically to their success. And Steinbrenner coming down and saying, hey, he doesn't walk away. He doesn't go to the rival. It's different because Saquon Barkley is playing in a position that is not that critical piece, right? If Saquon Barkley if this is Andrew Thomas and he's a free agent for whatever weird reason, this is when you swoop in. So it feels a little apples and oranges in that regard. And if it was John Mara that kept down, to get to your direct point, that came down and said, no, we pay him, we keep him, I would say, like, guess what, guys? Pack it in, because the next 3-4 years is off the rails once again, because John Mara has too often dipped his toes into those waters, and we've seen it have kind of critical impacts, including the speculation, though you and I pushed back on it, that if he said, hey, if you can make it work with Daniel Jones, we'd really like that because we drafted him 6th overall. Well, guess what? Here we are, looking to move on from that quarterback, looking to clear the $80 million after 2 years. I would be disgusted if that ended up being the ultimate needle mover here. If Joe Schoen said, we drew the line in the sand on what we're going to spend, we cannot spend over it, we have to be ironclad with this, and John Mara just came and said, who cares? Spend the extra money. It'll come at a cost to somewhere else. You can't afford to do that.
That's the hard business of drawing a line in the sand, right? You say, oh, we're so close to being able to retain him, but that would, and I agree. The Jay Caleb show is saying the same thing. He had shown that he was part of winning, a part of the solution. He had won championships for the Giants. He was at his peak level, like that. It is,
and that's not just Saquon Barkley's fault, right? We know that, but it's still the reality. It's still the reality.
But it is a comp of a beloved New York sports figure potentially going to a rival in the middle of his prime, if you consider this still part of his peak of his career. So you can understand, like, would you step in and pay a little bit of a premium to make sure he stays, even though that's not part of the plan? I find it fascinating. I'm kind of with you. You can't have it both ways. Either you want Joe Schoen to do the business stuff and leave him or do the contractual transactional stuff and have a plan, or you want John Mara to step in and say what's good for optics and the fan base on all of these things. And so you can't have one without the other. I prefer to let my GM actually do the football type things.
Let's do it. We had this question earlier. We brought it up ourselves earlier. We refused to get to it. Henry Mars, how about Justin Fields? The Justin Fields of it all, as we say. Let's just do it from the Giants' perspective. Do you have any appetite for this? If let's understand, The Bears are ready to move on from him. We understand the 5th-year options on the table for the team that trades for him. Set a low bar. Mac Jones to the Jaguars, 6th-round pick. He hasn't had any success even on a mediocre level that Justin Fields has had, obviously. What is there, let's say, any level of draft capital that the Giants would give up to get Justin Fields where you would say, oh, that is appealing, that is appetizing. I think the Giants should at least be heavily considering it.
No. The answer is no, pretty much across the board, because you put yourself in a weird position of like, he needs to develop, he needs to learn. And if you start getting decent play out of him, you either like prior to seeing that, you have to decide whether or not you want to guarantee his 5th-year option. And then you have to pay him as well on top of that if he ends up being, at least to the level of what Daniel Jones has been before. To me, it doesn't really make sense. I've always been a fan, of this offseason of signing a veteran free agent like a Russell Wilson at zero cost. You can look into the draft, but I think you're trying to find a complementary piece to be able to piece this room together. I don't really see Justin Fields in that plan. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe a 6th-round pick or a 7th-round pick, and you want to create a QB competition. Sure, but like I don't know. I feel like there's other places that make more sense for Justin Fields.
I think there is too. 6th or 7th, you're not giving up the same capital for a Mac Jones that you're giving up Justin Fields, even though you understand there's money implications there, obviously, as well. The other part of it you just noted, though, competition. Like, again, I just don't think we're talking about competition. If you make any decisions like this, if you're the Giants, it's not competition. It's about how do we put a guy in place here that whether we get a rookie quarterback next year's draft, this year's draft, whatever the case may be, that we have somebody in place that we think we can go out and be competitive and win games with. Philosophically, whether the Giants say it out loud or not, they have to have something in their mind very clearly about how they feel about it. A pause on that discussion so that you can update us on a different discussion.
I know things are flying fast and furious, but they relate to the Giants. We've talked about Joe Schoen drawing hard lines in the sand. I want to give Joe Schoen his flowers for a second. I think he deserves it for one deal that was made today, looping back to the Giants. So Ian Rappaport writes out one of the top free agents on the market. Dolphins star defensive tackle Christian Wilkins is headed to the Raiders. He gets a 4-year deal worth $110 million. That includes $84.75 million on a guaranteed contract. Now, Adam, he plays defensive tackle. Do we have someone across the offensive line that plays a relatively similar position?
Don't call him Big Sexy for nothing.
So when you think about Christian Wilkins gets a 4-year, $110 million deal with $84 million guaranteed. That equates to $27.5 million annually. The $84 million is a huge number. When you compare that to what Dexter Lawrence just signed for as the Giants were negotiating a deal with him, it was a 4-year, $87.5 million deal, including $60 million in guaranteed. So the total contract for the 4-year deal was almost identical for the amount of guaranteed money that Christian Wilkins got. Yep. When you think about that, it comes in at about $22 million per year, whereas Christian Wilkins is getting $27.5 million a year. The Giants got a great deal with Dexter Lawrence, according to what his market value is, right?
Of course, if and you draft a player like that and you believe in that player, this is the proactive nature. Like, let's get ahead of it. Let's get that extension in. Let's give you guaranteed money, right? And I've said this about when we talk about running backs and Saquon Barkley of, you make less or you go out and you make more the post-playing career. Hey, the dollars now is what matters. And that's what they did with Dexter Lawrence. And now it's going to save them. Like, now it'll save them on the back end. It does probably preclude from restructuring Dexter Lawrence if they want to free up cap space, because Dexter Lawrence is going to say, we're already doing solids here with the way you're currently paying me. But yeah, being on the front foot of decisions like this and paying a guy a year early is how you avoid ending up in spots like this on the back end. So I think, it's you said that right. We've questioned a lot and have a lot of wait and see on Joe Schoen and some of the decisions that he's made since becoming the GM. This is one of the best ones that he made. He knew the talent, addressed it early, and now is probably going to save $5 to $7 million annually over the life of his contract relative to what the market's going to dictate. And it's only going to get higher potentially going forward.
Well, I mean, Art Stapleton just said Wilkins is an excellent player. Imagine what Dexter Lawrence would get on the open market today. And you're like, he would leapfrog that deal that Christian Wilkins just signed, just knowing what his impact is. So like, this deal, I don't even know if Dexter Lawrence, if he was a free agent, would sign the deal that Christian Wilkins got. That's how much his
Right.
value has risen on this deal. And that's, Dan Duggan tweeted out the benefits of getting to the re-signing early is that you get to keep him under this type of thing. So it is pretty exciting to see that the Giants made a good decision on that side of things when we're talking about all this uncertainty around other players for the Giants.
What incidentally, as we'll probably start to tie a bow on this one. By the way, Andy, if at any point he's going to let me know quietly behind the scenes if he has some other things that he needs to get to here, because we said we'll do an hour, we'll do 45 minutes to an hour, but it's been too exciting. And one of the other things that I am going to be keeping an eye on is, remember that little thing about Darren Waller? Is he retiring? Is he sticking around? What exactly is the deal here? We'd love to get some information about that as we kind of like move our way through this infancy of the free agency period and the tampering opportunities, because that's money. That's money on the books, and you have to find a way to understand what you have in that. And I am terrified at the prospect of Darren Waller choosing to stick around, only to find out, oops, in camp, gosh darn it, I just couldn't stay healthy. And by the way, injuries they're a real thing. They happen. I don't begrudge any player that gets hurt. But when you couple an injury-prone player with some maybe concerns around if he has the commitment to play, gosh, is that a recipe for a potential disaster? It feels like we saw this towards the back end of Nate Solder's career when you could tell just physically he was breaking down. He had things from a family standpoint that impacted the last couple of years of his career as well. You hate to see a player put himself in a spot where if you're making the money you're making, you're going to hear it from fans if you put together another season like you did 1 year ago.
One other piece to the puzzle. Obviously, there's been a lot of smoke around Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. It sounds like that's heating up because they're officially allowed to negotiate. My personal opinion, without any sources on the Kirk Cousins piece of it, is I think he has been a brilliant negotiator throughout his entire career. And I think he wants to stay with the Minnesota Vikings, and he's just going to get whatever the highest number is out there and say, match this and I will stay. And I think he may stay. But there are people saying that he put up his house. His wife is from Atlanta, so the Atlanta makes a ton
That's because
of
he
sense.
got new money coming in. He wants to get that new house. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Right. He's like, I'm about to make $45 million again, guaranteed. So like, I might need some new digs. It will be interesting to see what happens with Kirk Cousins, because if he moves over to the Falcons, that's one less team for Justin Fields potentially. We don't know what Minnesota wants to do at the quarterback position. I don't know if the Bears would trade Justin Fields to an in-rival divisional team like the Minnesota Vikings, but that could be an option. Do the Vikings then solely focus on getting up in the draft to take a JJ McCarthy or a Michael Penix or a Bo Nix? Like, that's going to be interesting, and it kind of will shape the quarterback market.
Yeah, that's been a little bit of what we're waiting for to play out here. You mentioned Kirk Cousins, and then really, I am. We talked about it before. Justin Fields, even if it doesn't involve the Giants directly, what does it look like? Where is he going to go? What does it cost? And how does it impact the way some of these teams are going to be looking at the upcoming draft and what the Giants are going to have to or not have to do depending on what their agenda is? So as we work our way through the course of this free agency, I'll just say too, as of right now, as we'll tie a bow on this here, none of the key players that Andy and I talked about the Giants should be in on and should target have come off the board. Nothing has changed here in that regard. We've seen some offensive line money get thrown around that tells us it's going to be more costly. And if that's the case, I do wonder if has that impacted the Giants and Joe Schoen in terms of, well, if we thought there was an opportunity to bring back either Saquon or Xavier McKinney and also get an edge rusher and also get an offensive lineman, all of a sudden those numbers are maybe telling you it may just be those two key pieces in free agency or one of those guys we want to bring back. And then we fold in the draft here as well. So I find it fascinating to see where the next domino falls. And I really, really want to know what is the money that Josh Jacobs is signing for, because that's obviously a critical piece here. If you had to say right now, Andy, because if something really breaks, maybe I'll come back in. Maybe Andy and I will both come back in tonight. Otherwise, tomorrow morning, we'll be back in breaking it down. We'll probably schedule it as a live because so many things happen so quickly. If you had to call the shot right now, Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, both gone from the New York Football Giants.
I believe that Xavier McKinney has a better opportunity to come back than Saquon Barkley. And I don't think I would have thought of that originally. I think it's because I don't believe the safety market is necessarily going to materialize the way Xavier McKinney is hoping for. and the Giants will do the Austin Powers, like, come back to me, come back to me right here. And I think that there's going to be a middle ground to be able to still make him one of the top 10 highest paid safeties. The Saquon Barkley piece, if he gets above 12 million or $12.5 million and it gets put back over Joe Schoen's desk and says, this is what the market value dictates, and the Giants haven't given him the guaranteed money that he wants over the last 18 months, it would be a stark change in direction for Joe Schoen to then turn around and sign Saquon Barkley with the guaranteed money and the annual contract value that he's asking for. So while I think Saquon would like to be a Giant, maybe even more than Xavier McKinney would be, I think that there's a better chance that Xavier McKinney ends up being back rather than Saquon.
Yeah, it would just seem odd to your point that after all of this, the Giants could have signed Saquon Barkley last offseason to a 4-year, whatever it was, $40-something million deal, guaranteed money, spread it out, help your team out to be able to be better. They chose not to do that. They chose to go franchise tag. So it clearly just seems like the pattern is all leading to there's almost probably not going to be a low enough price point that the Giants are going to bring Barkley back on an extended deal. So we'll continue to monitor that and Xavier McKinney. But the
last thing I was going to leave everyone with, we haven't seen a flurry of activity, especially around Giants players, but Giants Daily on Twitter tweeted this out. And if you want to feel good for the first couple of hours of free agency,
here we go.
Dexter Lawrence is now the 8th highest paid player at his position after the Wilkins deal. You got to feel good if you're a Giant fan. That feels like the one deal that Joe Schoen absolutely nailed. Feels like Andrew Thomas is the other one that he nailed. But right now, you're seeing what the market has for offensive tackles as well as defensive linemen and defensive tackles. The Giants have 2 cornerstones there that we're not worried about. But as you mentioned, we're going to have to see where Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, and the offensive line goes in free agency.
In the end, as we say, if anything breaks, you can see us live back on here. Follow us over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast. Obviously, over on Twitter, if you're watching us there, at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, at Adam Armbrecht. If not, we'll be right back probably tomorrow morning, assuming that things start to unfold here, updating the market. But before we even leave here, I only know by the smirk on Andy's face that something has happened, and it's going to inform this offseason for the Giants.
Just finishing things up, putting a bow on the Gabe Davis piece, because we said how much would you pay?
Yeah.
Would you pay? How much would you pay? He's agreed to a 3-year deal for $39 million, which is in that $13 million range that we were just saying. That has incentives that can bump him up to $50 million. So if he makes all pros and Pro Bowls, has double-digit touchdowns, all of those fun things that we like to think about. But $13 million is the baseline. That's kind of what we thought. So the mid-tier market is not being outrageous. Just wanted to update people that that's the market that players like Gabe Davis are living in. Maybe the Giants are in that 3rd-tier market, depending on whether or not they want to go with wide receiver at number 1.
And we also have that free agent, the Titans, free agent center Lloyd Cushenberry potentially is going to be signing with him per Jeremy Fowler looking over at Jonathan Jones. So retweeting him out there. So movement across the offensive line, as we say, going to continue to see these things develop and unfold over the next 12, 24, 36 hours. We can't.
Last one, actual Giants signing. Jordan Renan posting that the Giants have re-signed wide receiver, kick returner Gunnar Olszewski to a 1-year deal per source. So just like everyone expected, the first big domino to fall for the Giants re-signing their own is punt returner, kick returner who came in middle of the season, Gunnar Olszewski. I figured I'd leave everyone on like a huge signing for the Giants. Adam, how do you feel?
You want to act like it's not a big deal, but you rewind it back and remember how nobody could return a kick or a punt for 3/4 of the season before they brought Gunnar in. This does kind of matter. You got it done. You got it out of the way. It's not a thing you have to wonder or worry about. Listen, these are margin moves. We didn't want it to be the first move the Giants maybe made, but it's a good move. You keep a guy in-house. You feel like you have that box checked. It doesn't matter, man. Anytime it's a win, I don't care if it's getting $5 at the roulette table or 5,000. You go ahead, you put that in your pocket, and you walk home happy. So good job by the Giants to at least get something going here. Obviously, we know there's going to be bigger moves ahead for Big Blue. Follow us on all those platforms. One Giant Podcast at AndyMac214 at Adam Armbrecht. We'll be back again when the news breaks, and at a minimum tomorrow morning, talking all things New York football Giants. And until then, as Andrew Makowitz in these free agent times would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.